taking no account of what the actual market demand is. So that's probably not a very good one to use, unless you can prove that you're so much better that everything you make will be sold. And that's a big assumption to make when you're running a business. People will think you're screwy if you do that, unless you can guarantee it, unless you can show why. The 15,000 is a much more logical one to use, because it's based on reality. It's based on demand. It's taking into account that you're new, and the 15,000 is probably the better bet to use for your sales forecasting. But you should always calculate that bottom one. Not so much from a sales point of view as a production point of view. How busy can you be? If the market takes off, or if we get a heat wave, or if you are that much better than anybody else, it's quite possible you'll be able to sell everything you can make. But if you go to sell more than that, you can't cope with it. And if you can't cope, your quality falls. So it's essential you know your capacity in whatever way you measure it. If you're in consultancy, it's about your time. If it's about making products, it's about how many can you make. Always know the maximum that you can cope with. Because one day, with Business Gateway's help, you're all going to be very successful business people, and your sales are going to be up and up and up. You need to know the top. You need to know when you can't cope anymore. Because if you want to keep growing at that stage, you've got to take on extra resources. You may need more money, or you may need new machines, or you may need a bigger factory, or you may have to spend more time on it, or you may have to take on extra staff to cope with it. So always calculate your capacity. How busy can you be? But don't use it as a sales forecast unless it's sensible. You're better using statistical information. What's this? How much is being spent in your marketplace? How many competitors are there? And what's your reasonable likely share to be? Sales forecasting comes from research and logical assumptions. So there will be statistics for almost every industry there is. How much money is spent in your target market area. And therefore, once you know how many competitors there are, and once you know the breakdown of that, it may be there are several other businesses the same size as you, and it's reasonable to assume you'll get an equal share. But it may be that one or two of the big international companies are in your marketplace, and they've got 80% of the market sewn up. The only bit you can even look at is the other 20%, unless you can prove you're better than these big boys. So sales forecasting comes from doing research. Customer behaviour, competitor behaviour, when do customers buy, how much do they buy, what are they paying, what are the trends in demand and the trends in price. And you can estimate the likely sales that you'll get. As I said before, it won't be right. Your job is to monitor once you get started. What did we expect? What did we get? What's the difference? Why is the difference? And what can we do about it? It also depends on your pricing policy, because it depends where you are in the marketplace. And there's different places you can be. You can have a low price, lower than anybody else. Don't assume that will get you more business, but it might. And a lot of businesses start off in the early days with a slightly lower price than anybody else, hoping they will get more. They might not. Because at the end of the day, customers are buying on the quality as much as the price. You might decide to go in with a high price, because you're emphasising the quality that you've got. You're in the high price, high quality end. It might be somewhere in between. Market positioning is something we look at in the marketing workshop. But basically that is, whereabouts are you in the market? Are you at the Harrods end of the market, high price, high quality? Or are you at the pound stretchers end of the market, low price, low quality? Both very successful businesses, because they're providing value for money and they know who they're targeting. So maybe you go for a niche market, high or low, or it may be you have a range of products and services so that you can target everybody with different prices and different qualities. As it says at the bottom there, basically your pricing policy must ensure that you make profits at some point, that your income exceeds your costs. But it can be done in different ways. You decide where you want to be in the market. We've also got to look at additional things, seasonality and start-up business. In the second example we looked at, we took into account start-up. We said we expect to get 30,000 a year, but because we knew we'll have that. There are other ways to go about that. You can do it on a month-to-month basis if you like. If we accept the 4,000 as a realistic target for you to get sales of, then in April, when we're brand new and nobody knows us, we'll only get 40% of our real share. So we'll only get 1,600 sales. In month 2, as we get better known, we'll get 60%. In month 3, we'll get 80%. By month 4, we'll be right into the marketplace. It won't happen as quickly as that. But you see the basic principle here? We're just saying as we get better known, we'll get more of our real share. So instead of using 4,000 a month, we would use these figures as our sales forecast. And if there's seasonality involved in your business, and there is in a lot of businesses, you have to take that into account as well. Take an example. Oh, yeah.
I was just going to tell you, it's kind of like seasonality. How do you account for cancellations? Because obviously I teach about once a month, someone says, oh no, I'm ill. I can't come. How do I account for that?
That's a more difficult one because there probably won't be statistics about that. But it would have to be your own experience or your own estimates of if you know your marketplace. And you can take that into account and say, in my market there's generally a 15% cancellation rate or a 20%. And you would just use those. Okay. So let's look at a different example where seasonality does come into play. Greetings cards. Suppose you go into business designing and making greetings cards. Then you've got January, which is quiet, nothing happens in January. In February, you'll get Valentine's Day, sales rocket. In March, or possibly April, you've got Easter, and there's an Easter card market as well. There's also Mother's Day, there's Father's Day in May, and then nothing happens till Christmas. But you've also got a steady birthday market in there. So you've got to take that into account as well. Or you've got to check that, because I honestly do not know, is there a steady birthday market? Is every month of the year got similar?
I used to work at a greetings card shop. September's the peak.
September's the peak, is it? So that's going back to December. Okay, say no more. But you would be able to get that information. You'd be able to find it for yourself in your own marketplace. And you'd be able to make seasonality adjustments as well as startup adjustments. In the garden chair business, springtime is when people buy garden chairs, and maybe summertime. And then in the winter nobody buys them. So what we've done here is we've taken our start-up adjusted figures and we've then looked at the seasonality. In April, demand is 10% above the annual average. So we can assume we'll get our share of that 10%. So we can add 10% to our estimates. In May and June, that's the peak period. Demand is 25% higher than average. So we can assume we'll get 25% more. By July, it's still 15% above average, but falling. In August, it's average. By September, it's fallen below average. And will probably continue right through till next spring. But you're taking 4,000 a month, you're adjusting it for startup, and then you're adjusting it for seasonality. And you're saying if demand increases, I'll get my share of that. And these are the figures that you would actually use as your sales forecast. And you could explain them, and they make sense, and they're logical. And people will accept them. They won't be right. Guaranteed they won't be right. But people will accept that that's reasonable. And that's all you have to do. Once you're in business and you've got actual statistical figures to use, you can get more accurate than that. But at the start-up stage, you don't know. Even existing businesses don't know their future sales. British Airways is a great example. They've been on the go for 90 odd years. You'd think with 90 years records they could forecast their sales for next year. 4 or 5 years ago they got it totally wrong. Why? Because a cloud came across from Iceland and downed all the airplanes. Nobody would expect that, nobody could forecast that. Their staff went on strike as well and the planes were grounded, their income depleted. And if they get it wrong with 90 years experience, what chance have you got getting it right with no experience? None. All you've got to do is be sensible here. Come up with figures based on some research and some logic, and you'll come up with sales figures that are totally